My name is Rowan Ashford, and 3 weeks ago I buried my only daughter. Her name was Rosie. She was 8 years old. She loved space documentaries, drawing rocket ships, and believed every pain could be softened by glitter stickers and banana pancakes. The morning of her funeral, I sat alone in my car outside the service home. The dress I wore still smelled like lilies from the wake, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I stared at the last message from my sister. A single word. Okay. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I'll be there. Just, okay. Later that day, I found out why. My mother and my sister had moved forward with Celeste's housewarming party, the one she couldn't reschedule, the one that was apparently planned for weeks. They called Rosie's funeral a goodbye to a child who suffered through 12 months of agony, a minor event. That was the moment something inside me cracked, not in the way things break and collapse, but in the way things break and sharpen. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I dialed my lawyer. This story isn't about grief. Not really. It's about what comes after. When the people you trusted the most choose celebration over your child's death, you learn exactly what kind of woman you are. And me? I learned I am not the woman who lets that go. I sat in my car for 40 minutes before I had the strength to open the door. The funeral home loomed in front of me, all dark wood and hushed windows, like it was built to swallow grief whole and leave nothing but silence behind. I wasn't avoiding going inside. Rosie was already there. Inside that building, inside a casket no child should ever be in. I just needed to feel something solid before I had to let go again. The phone buzzed in my lap. It was still open to the last text I had sent my family. Rosie passed. Funeral is Friday at 10. Celeste, my sister, had replied with one word. Okay. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I'll be there. Just that. Okay. I hadn't heard from my mother at all, until now. Her name lit up the screen like a curse. I didn't have the energy to hold the phone to my ear, so I hit speaker. Rowan, she said brightly, as though we were about to discuss brunch. I'm here, I said. My voice barely qualified as sound. There was a pause, and then, about the funeral. I knew. Instantly. It was like being dunked in ice. We can't make it, she said. We promised Celeste we'd help with the housewarming. It's been on the calendar for weeks. I stared out the windshield, through a blur of tears I didn't even realize had returned. Her housewarming, I repeated. It's her first home, Mom continued. You know how important that is to her. More important than Rosie's funeral. Don't be dramatic, she snapped, voice shifting from performative grief to condescension in a breath. You've had time to prepare. Rosie's been sick for a year. It's not like this was a surprise. I didn't answer her. I hung up. And then I called Celeste. She picked up after 2 rings, sounding annoyed. What is it? You're throwing a party on the day of my daughter's funeral. The date was set weeks ago, Rowan, she said flatly. She's already gone. She doesn't care what day she's buried. I'm alive, and I need to celebrate moving on. I felt the phone slip in my hand, my fingers suddenly foreign and numb. Rosie used to say the house Celeste was moving into, Grandma's old place, was her favorite. She loved the pink tile in the kitchen and the creaky steps that sounded like laughter if you stepped just right. She once said, if a house can make someone happy, maybe it should stay in the family. Now that house would host strangers drinking wine, while my daughter's casket lowered into the earth. I didn't answer Celeste. There was no language in existence that could meet her where she had chosen to stand. Inside the funeral home, the director greeted me gently. His eyes scanned the space behind me, as if expecting someone to follow. There was no one. Not a single family member came. The seats reserved for them stayed empty. The photos of Rosie lining the hallway, her in her superhero Halloween costume, her blowing out candles on her last birthday, felt like artifacts in a museum nobody cared to visit. At the gravesite, I stood alone. The wind was sharp. I said goodbye with no hand to hold, not even my mother's. Later that night, when the room was finally still, I sat on Rosie's bed, surrounded by the drawings she'd made for her nurses. Her favorite rock collection lined the windowsill. In that silence, I realized something. I was not just mourning my daughter. I was mourning the illusion of family. They weren't just absent. They had made a choice, and I was about to make mine. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I reread every message from my mother and Celeste, like picking at a scab just to feel the sting. At 6:03 a.m., I made the first call that mattered. Mr. Carlyle had been my grandmother's attorney for over 3 decades. He answered on the third ring, his voice gravelly and polite, the kind of tone reserved for widows and bad news. "I need to confirm something," I said, skipping pleasantries. "The house Celeste lives in, my grandmother's house, is it legally hers?" There was a pause, papers shuffled. Then his voice returned, clear and firm. "No, the deed is still in your name, Miss Ashford. We never completed the transfer. I have it right here." I stared at the ceiling, blinking against the harsh morning light. "That can't be right," I said. "I gave her the keys last year." "Giving keys is not the same as giving property," he said gently. "You told me to put the paperwork on hold until things settled with Rosie's diagnosis." It came back in fragments. The week after Grandma's funeral, my mother and Wayne sitting at my kitchen table, tea gone cold, their words soft and manipulative. "Celeste needs a fresh start," Mom had said, swirling her spoon with nervous energy. "She has nothing. You already have your own place," Wayne added. I was too hollow to argue, too overwhelmed by hospital schedules and fear and medical terms I still couldn't pronounce. "Fine," I'd said. "She can have it. We'll do the paperwork later." Later never came. Now I sat across from Mr. Carlyle, still dressed in black, my eyes raw, my fingers curled around the edge of his desk. 4 hours ago, I'd buried my child. Now I was unearthing something else entirely. "There's something else," he said. "You asked me last year to keep financial records for tax purposes. I pulled them." He slid a folder toward me. My name was on the tab. I opened it slowly. The first page was a bank statement, then another. 5 years of them, organized by month. Each one showed a consistent $2,000 transfer from my account to my mother's. Even during the months Rosie was in treatment, even when I was selling first editions to cover copays, even the month I maxed out my credit card to pay for anti-nausea meds. My stomach lurched. A separate page was clipped to the back. A car loan, my mother's name, $42,000, dated 1 month after Rosie's diagnosis. A Mercedes. I sat back, air gone from the room. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. "Need extra this month. Insurance went up. How's Rosie?" I didn't respond. Instead, I opened Instagram. At the top of my feed, a photo posted just 2 hours earlier. My mother and Celeste, champagne glasses raised in my grandmother's kitchen. The caption read, "New beginnings, blessed new house, #gratitude, #family first." In the background, the antique mirror reflected their grinning faces. Mirror once belonging to the woman who raised me, who had intended that house as my daughter's second home. That was the final fracture. Not just their absence, not just their selfishness, but the smile behind it. This wasn't forgetfulness. It wasn't bad timing. It was cruelty. Planned, packaged, and shared with hashtags. I looked at Mr. Carlyle. "What would it take?" I asked, voice like steel, "to get them out?" He didn't blink. "I'll prepare the documents." And just like that, the part of me that used to flinch, used to rationalize, used to hope, died alongside my daughter. What remained would not be ignored. I gave myself until sundown. Until the sky turned the same lavender as Rosie's favorite sweater, I let myself fall apart one last time. I held her last drawing, half finished, colored outside the lines, and let the ache settle like fog in my chest. Then I stood up and called Mr. Carlyle. He had already started the eviction paperwork. The next call was to Noel. We hadn't talked since the funeral. He showed up that night with flash drives, printouts, and the guilt of a father who couldn't save his daughter, but might help her mother reclaim something. We worked at the kitchen table, now covered in evidence. Screenshots of texts, photos of hospital birthdays, the message where I told my family Rosie had passed. Every message was marked as raid. Celeste had replied, "Okay." Noel slid an email toward me. "From your landlord," he said. My mother had called him, claimed I was mentally unstable, and asked him to send my rent payments to her directly. He'd refused, thankfully, but now I had it in writing. "They're not just heartless," I said. They're calculated. The next afternoon, I met 2 officers at my grandmother's house. I handed them the deed. Miss Ashford, Officer Brennan said, you're the legal owner? Yes, always have been. Celeste opened the door in yoga pants, holding a smoothie. Her face fell when she saw me. This is my house, she snapped. No, I said. You just acted like it was. The officers explained the 48-hour notice. Celeste raged, screamed, cursed. The neighbors watched from porches. I buried my daughter alone, I told her, while you were drinking champagne in her memory. That night, I changed the locks. By morning, I had 4 security cameras mounted and cloud-connected. I didn't feel victorious. I felt something sharper, control. Celeste didn't leave quietly. 2 nights after the eviction notice was served, my security app buzzed just past midnight. The motion sensor triggered. Then the feed flickered into night vision. Her car was parked halfway up the driveway. She moved toward the back of the house, something metallic glinting in her hand. The camera caught her smashing the rear window with a swing of a bat. I didn't hesitate. I called 911. My sister is breaking into my home. I have live footage. She was removed legally 2 days ago. By the time I heard the sirens, I was already outside, standing on the sidewalk, holding my phone, watching. The police cruiser pulled up. Officer Brennan stepped out. His face registered recognition, then something darker. Confirmation. She's inside? He asked. I nodded. Back window. You'll see. The officers approached the house. Celeste burst through the front door, still gripping the bat. Her hair was a mess, her face streaked with fury. You called the cops on your own sister? Officer Brennan moved in front of her. Ma'am, drop the weapon. She let it fall, sneering. This is ridiculous. This is my house. No, I said, it isn't, and the cameras prove it. Her eyes darted toward the blinking red lens mounted under the eaves. I want to press charges, I told the officers. Breaking and entering, vandalism. She'll need to fill out a statement, Brennan said, as his partner read Celeste her rights. My sister thrashed once, but they didn't flinch. The neighbors watched silently from doorways and porches. No one spoke. The next morning, my mother showed up on my porch. Red-rimmed eyes. A purse clutched to her chest like armor. I didn't invite her in. Rowan, this has gone too far. We're family. No, I said. You made a choice. You abandoned Rosie. She wouldn't want this division. Don't speak her name, I said, ice running through each word. Her grief mask slipped. Her voice turned hard. You've always been difficult, so sensitive. Megan could lose her job over this. She should have thought of that before she shattered a window. That afternoon, a heavily edited video appeared on Facebook. Celeste stitching together pieces of security footage to make herself look like the victim. But the truth had its own voice. Rosie's teacher commented first. I was at the funeral. I saw the front row, empty. Her hospice nurse chimed in. I sat with Rowan during Rosie's final hours. Alone. Photos surfaced of the funeral. Dozens of attendees, a row of empty family seats in the front. And then the county health department made a statement. Miss Ashford has been placed on leave pending investigation. My phone rang again. My mother. The church is asking questions, she said, nearly panicked. Your father's sister saw the video. This could destroy our name. It's not about your reputation, I said. It's about what you did. She tried to blame me. Called me cruel. Said I'd regret cutting them off, but for once I didn't flinch. My lawyer confirmed. Cease and desist letters have been delivered. They're legally barred from posting about you. Good, I replied. File the restraining orders next. And the house? I'm donating it, I said, to the Children's Cancer Foundation. A beat of silence, then, understood. That night, I walked through my grandmother's now empty living room. For the first time, it felt like mine. I reached behind a row of books and pulled out a folded piece of paper, Rosie's drawing, a stick figure with messy curls and a red cape. My mommy is a superhero, it read in her handwriting. This time, the tears came not from grief, but from something cleaner, something like freedom. The day after I donated the house, I received a flurry of messages. Some were from distant relatives, those who had once reposted Celeste's video without question. Now they offered hesitant apologies, awkward explanations. Others didn't bother with excuses. They just said, "I'm sorry," and left it at that. I responded to none of them. Noel stopped by later that evening. He didn't bring flowers or casseroles, just a manila envelope and 2 coffees. "This is everything," he said, sliding the folder across my counter. Inside were screenshots, bank records, email chains, all the evidence we'd compiled, the paper trail showing how my mother and sister siphoned money from me while I was trying to save my daughter's life. "Anything else?" I asked. He nodded. "One more thing. The foundation raised over $12,000 in Rosie's name. People are still donating." I pressed the envelope to my chest. For once, it wasn't grief that choked me. It was something softer, something like pride. Later that night, as I cleaned out Rosie's art box, my phone buzzed again. Another certified letter. This one from Megan's lawyer. I opened it at the sink while the faucet ran. It was a ceasefire disguised as a threat, an offer to settle matters privately and avoid further damage to family reputation. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I just placed the letter in the shredder and went back to washing paintbrushes. That week, I took down the last of the sympathy cards. Not because I was moving on. I hate that phrase, but because I was done being frozen. Rosie's grave was still fresh, the grass not yet grown. I knelt by her headstone, brushing my fingers across the engraved letters. "I always taught you to be kind," I whispered, "but I should have taught you to stand your ground too. I'm learning, I promise." When I got home, a small box waited by my front door. Inside was a single daisy and a note in crooked handwriting. "I heard what your family did. You're not alone." It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. I stood on the porch for a long time, watching the sun disappear behind the treetops. The air was cool, still. I didn't need anyone to tell me I'd done the right thing. Peace doesn't always come from forgiveness. Sometimes it comes from walking away with both hands empty and still feeling whole. The butter yellow paint in my new hallway caught the morning light. Rosie's drawings lined the walls. Rockets, capes, planets, flowers, all framed in simple wooden borders. I touched each one as I passed. A quiet ritual no one asked about. I didn't mind. Grief had taught me to cherish what no one else noticed. This wasn't rebuilding. This was beginning again. With different rules, different walls, and no one left to please but myself. On Tuesday evenings, I hosted a support group at the community center. 6 parents. All of us had buried a child. We didn't trade platitudes or timelines for moving on. We talked about the guilt, the silence, the way time had bent around our pain. And somehow, in that honesty, we stitched ourselves back together, thread by trembling thread. Noel came once. He sat in the back and didn't say a word, just listened. Later, he told me it was the first time he'd felt understood since the funeral. That was enough. One afternoon, the hospital coordinator called. "The families keep asking when you're coming back," she said. "They want more art days. Would you consider expanding the program to the satellite clinics?" I said yes, without hesitation, without fear. The next morning, I drove to Rosie's grave. The grass had begun to grow in, soft and bright. I knelt and laid a bunch of daisies beside her stone. "You made me stronger than I ever thought I could be," I whispered, "and I promise, I'm using every ounce of it." When I got home, a small envelope waited under my door. Inside was a drawing from Lily, the girl next door. A big red heart and stick figures holding hands beneath a tree. The note read, "Your flowers made me smile. I like your house." I taped it to the fridge. That evening, I sat on the porch, tea in hand, watching the stars blink alive above me. For the first time in a year, I didn't feel haunted by what I'd lost. I felt rooted by what I'd reclaimed. Peace doesn't always arrive like a sunrise. Sometimes it settles quietly, firm, unapologetic. I hadn't just survived them, I had eclipsed them. I never thought the sharpest humiliation of my life would come with string lights, white roses, and champagne flutes. But there I was, at my younger sister's wedding, smiling through clenched teeth, wearing a rental dress I ironed in a motel bathroom, and pretending that maybe, just maybe, I belonged. My name is Rowan Ashford. I'm 34, a single mother, a waitress, a woman who's learned to be quiet when it hurts. I raised my son Jude on tips and grit. We live in a small apartment above a florist shop where you can hear every passing truck shake the floorboards. It's not glamorous, but it's ours. That night, Jude sat beside me in his too-tight blazer, eyes wide with wonder at the chandeliers. He thought we were walking into something magical. I let him believe that. But then my sister, Delilah, took the microphone. She smiled that wide, gleaming smile of hers, the kind that fools a room full of strangers, and said she wanted to thank her big sister for being a shining example. I exhaled, just a little, thinking maybe she'd grown. And then she said it. She's done it all on her own. No husband, no help, clearly no takers. But hey, she's here. The laughter was loud, the kind that echoes. Jude looked up at me, confused. I felt his little hand slide into mine. And just like that, I knew. This wasn't about family. It never had been. People like to romanticize the idea of family. The Sunday dinners, the old photo albums, the inside jokes that live forever in group texts. But for me, family has always been a quiet kind of exile. I didn't grow up poor. I grew up invisible. Catherine Ashford, my mother, had a talent for playing favorites. And in her eyes, there was only one star worth watching. My younger sister, Delilah. Delilah was the kind of girl who glided through life with a spotlight trailing her. She was blonde, bold, and blessed from birth. Valedictorian, homecoming queen, college scholarship, and now a picture-perfect wedding. Me? I was the girl who got pregnant at 25 by a man who disappeared faster than the second pink line on the test. When Jude was born, he became my whole world. I learned to cook with one hand and bounce him on my hip with the other. I skipped meals so he wouldn't. I worked 2 jobs, slept in shifts, and loved him so fully it made the loneliness bearable. But the rest of my family? They looked at me like a cautionary tale. A failure. A woman who had made her bed and was now doomed to sleep in it, alone. So when Delilah's wedding invitation came in the mail, I almost threw it out. My name was spelled wrong, again. The RSVP card didn't include a +1. I wasn't asked to be in the bridal party, and instead of an actual note from my sister, it came with a mass-printed message thanking guests for supporting our perfect day. I stared at it for a long time. Then I looked over at Jude, who was sitting cross-legged on the floor, drawing rocket ships on the back of a takeout menu. He'd never been to a wedding before, never seen his mother in a dress, never gotten to feel like part of the family he technically belonged to. So I said yes. I rented a dress off a clearance rack and borrowed heels from a coworker. I did my own hair in the mirror over our leaky sink while Jude practiced smiling in his clip-on tie. I told myself it was for him. Maybe, just maybe, showing up would shift something. Maybe they'd see us again. The venue was gorgeous. White roses lined the aisle, gold-accented cutlery sparkled under chandeliers, and a quartet played soft strings in the background. The kind of place that smelled like old money and expensive decisions. When we arrived, Delilah walked past me in a gown that looked straight out of a bridal magazine. She glanced down at Jude, then at me. "You made it," she said, like it was a surprise. "He's getting big," she added flatly, before turning back to the spotlight. No hug, no warmth, just a confirmation that I was still second tier. My mother didn't even acknowledge us. She brushed past like we were part of the decor. Jude didn't notice. He was too busy marveling at the lights. He leaned over and whispered, "It looks like a spaceship, Mama." I smiled and squeezed his hand. We were seated at the table 14, near the kitchen doors, where you could smell the dishwater every time they swung open. I laughed quietly. Of course. Still, I told myself to stay calm. It was just one night. Jude was happy. That had to count for something. And then came the speeches. The room was humming with energy. The soft clinking of glasses, flashes from phones, bursts of laughter that didn't include me. Delilah's world was seamless, polished, and curated. And there I was, the wrinkle in the fabric, sitting near the waitstaff doors and praying no one spilled wine on my rented dress. Jude sat beside me, swinging his legs, completely enchanted. "Mama, did you see that cake?" "It's taller than me," he whispered, eyes wide. His innocence was my only armor. I kept smiling for him. The place cards were letterpressed and embossed with gold. I found mine wedged between someone's purse and a discarded cocktail napkin. They spelled it Rowan. I didn't bother correcting it. Dinner arrived in waves, plated elegance I couldn't pronounce. Jude tried to eat politely, but at one point got chocolate mousse on his tie. I dabbed at the stain with a linen napkin and whispered, "You're doing great, baby." He beamed. From across the room, I caught my mother's eye. For a brief second, I thought she might nod, smile, acknowledge my existence. Instead, she turned to the woman beside her and laughed at something. It could have been about anything, but I knew it was me. I always knew. I shifted in my seat, trying to stay invisible, knowing the cameras weren't for us. Delilah flitted from table to table like a politician, always smiling, always the center of attention. And when she finally reached ours, her eyes flicked over me like I was a placeholder. "You two look nice," she said, not even bothering to crouch to Jude's level. "Thanks for inviting us," I offered. She gave a tight smile. "Of course," she said, her tone making it clear she didn't mean it. Then came the toasts. A man in a navy suit, her fiancé's best friend, stood and told a safe, forgettable story about how Delilah used to sneak extra fries in college. People laughed. It was charming in that harmless beige way. Then Delilah stood. She looked stunning, of course. Her dress shimmered under the reception lights. Her posture was flawless, her smile effortless. She held her champagne flute like a queen holding court. The room fell silent. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," she began. "It's the happiest day of my life, and I'm surrounded by people who mean everything to me." I held my breath. Jude leaned against my arm, still riding the fairy tale. Delilah talked about love, about fate, about Nate being her best friend. It was sweet, even I had to admit that, and for a moment, I let myself hope that maybe she wouldn't twist the knife. But then she turned. "And of course," she said, her voice lilting with mock sincerity, "I want to acknowledge my big sister, Rowan. She's always been such a strong example." The spotlight shifted. Eyes turned. I straightened my spine. I smiled politely. "She's the bravest woman I know," Delilah continued. "She raised a child on her own. No husband, no help, just her and whatever babysitter was kind enough to step in." A few people chuckled. My stomach dropped. "But seriously," she added, her tone dripping sweet poison, "it's amazing how she's managed. A single mom, unwanted, but she still shows up." Laughter, louder this time. Not confused, not hesitant, just loud. I went cold. Jude blinked up at me, his small hand tightening around mine. "Why did she say that, Mama?" he whispered. Before I could respond, my mother's voice rang out from across the room. "She's a used product," Catherine said, her voice soaked in pride. "But hey, she still polishes up nice." The laughter turned sharp, cruel, real. I sat there frozen. I could hear my own heartbeat louder than the music. I felt everyone watching, everyone laughing. Not with me, never with me, at me. I looked around, faces I'd grown up with, shared holidays with. Not one looked sorry. Not one looked surprised. Even Grandpa Henry, who once called me his little shadow, was staring down at his untouched dessert. And Jude, he looked shattered. Not because he understood all the words, but because he saw my face, and he saw theirs. That's when something in me cracked. I don't remember standing. One moment I was gripping my napkin like it was a lifeline, and the next I was upright, heart thudding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't have a plan. No speech. No dramatic exit. I just knew I couldn't sit there another second while people toasted my shame. I felt Jude's small fingers tighten around mine. "Are we leaving?" he asked, his voice small, unsure. I nodded. "Yeah, baby, we're going." But before we could take a step, another chair scraped loudly against the floor. All eyes turned to the head table. Nathaniel Clark, the groom, Delilah's perfect polished fiancé, was rising slowly to his feet. He didn't look at Delilah. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at me. His face wasn't angry. It wasn't smug. It was something colder, stern, resolute. He reached for the microphone in Delilah's hand. She hesitated, just for a beat. Then, sensing the shift in the room, she let go. The mic whined softly as Nate adjusted it. The entire room went still. You could have heard a fork drop. He exhaled once, then said calmly, "Rowan, please don't go." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. I froze, Jude half shielded behind me. "I can't pretend I'm okay with what just happened," Nate continued, his voice steady, almost too calm. "I won't stand up here and let cruelty pass as comedy. Not tonight. Not ever." Delilah's face hardened. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Nate stepped out from behind the table, slowly approaching where we stood at the back of the room. He didn't rush. He walked like a man moving through fog, deliberate, certain, and unafraid. "I've heard a lot about family while planning this wedding," he said. "Tradition, loyalty, appearances." He stopped just beside our table, not quite facing me, not quite facing the guests. But what I saw just now wasn't family. It was mockery in a dress and a mother laughing at her own daughter's pain. The air left the room. Catherine sat frozen, her wineglass halfway to her lips. Nate turned toward Delilah. "You mocked your sister in front of everyone. You reduced her life to a punchline. And worse, you made her son watch." Delilah's jaw twitched. "It was a joke," she said softly. "It was cruelty," he answered. And then he turned to Jude, kneeled, looked him in the eye. "Your mom," he said gently, "is the strongest person in this room. Don't ever forget that." Jude didn't say a word. He just stared, wide-eyed, breathing quietly. When Nate stood again, he faced the crowd one last time. "I don't want to marry into a family that thinks shame is tradition, and laughter is more important than dignity, so I won't." And then he walked, past Delilah, past her parents, past the stunned guests still gripping their champagne flutes. He never looked back, and just like that, the fairy tale collapsed. People turned, shifting uncomfortably, some whispering. Others watched us like a scene from a train crash they couldn't look away from. Catherine stood up sharply, her chair screeching. "What an ungrateful boy," she barked. Typical Ashford women, always making a scene. But no one laughed this time. No one clinked a glass. No one cheered. Her voice fell flat in a room that had already decided she'd lost. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. For once, I wasn't the one who looked small. I turned to Jude and brushed his hair from his forehead. "Let's go home," I whispered. He nodded, and we walked. Slowly, past their shocked faces, past their silence. Halfway to the exit, I heard my name. "Rowan!" It was Grandpa Henry. His voice shook. His eyes were rimmed red. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have said something. Years ago." I nodded. I understood. His silence had hurt, but I knew how loud fear could be, and I wasn't carrying his guilt anymore. We stepped into the night air. It was cool, crisp, clean. Jude squeezed my hand. "Is the wedding over?" I smiled. "Yeah, baby. I think it ended exactly how it was supposed to." The silence that followed us out of that reception hall was deafening. No music played. No one followed. Even the air outside felt freer, like stepping out of a pressure chamber. Jude was quiet as we walked to the car. His small hand still wrapped in mine, like he wasn't sure the world had stopped spinning yet. I helped him into the back seat, buckled him in, and sat behind the wheel for a long time before starting the engine. I didn't cry, I didn't rage, I just felt still. The drive home was quiet. No radio. Just the soft hum of tires on asphalt, and Jude tapping his fingers against the window in a rhythm only he understood. That night, after I tucked him in and kissed his forehead, I stood at his doorway for longer than usual. The house was quiet, peaceful in a way that made the contrast from earlier Even starker. The next morning, I woke up to 12 missed calls. Unknown numbers, distant cousins, even some guests I hadn't spoken to in years. I ignored them all. By noon, a friend texted me a link to a Facebook video. Someone had recorded Nate's speech. It had already hit 50,000 views. The comments were pouring in. She deserved better. He's a real man. Every single mom out there just got a little bit of justice. Not all heroes wear capes. Some wear suits at weddings. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just let myself feel it. The weight that had been crushing me for years, suddenly gone. Later that week, a small bouquet of wildflowers arrived at my door. No return address, no note, just a tiny card that read, "To the Lioness." I didn't need to ask who sent it. The wedding was off, quietly scrubbed from Delilah's social media like it had never existed. No public explanation, no dramatic posts, just erased. She never reached out. Catherine did, once. Not to apologize, of course, just to say that I had embarrassed the family by not playing along, that my lack of humor had ruined everything. I let her talk for 30 seconds. Then I said something I never thought I'd have the courage to say. "I'm not your scapegoat anymore." And I hung up. No tears, no shouting, just a clean break. Final. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need them to admit they were wrong. I just needed to stop waiting for permission to see my own worth. Jude changed too. He asked more questions now. About kindness, about cruelty, about what makes someone brave. Sometimes he'd give pretend speeches to his action figures, defending the little guy. I watched him, quietly amazed. One night, as we brushed our teeth side by side, he looked up at me in the mirror and asked, "Mom, are you still sad about what Aunt Delilah said?" I paused, then answered honestly, "Not anymore. Why?" He shrugged, a little toothpaste on his chin. "Because I think you won, even though it wasn't a fight." That stayed with me. Because he was right. I didn't yell. I didn't insult anyone back. I didn't storm out crying or demand justice. I just stood up, held my son's hand, and walked away. And someone else, someone unexpected, finally spoke the words I never could. 6 months have passed since the wedding that wasn't. There was no official statement, no family meeting, no dramatic confrontation, just silence, a silence that, for once, wasn't mine to carry. Delilah moved on like nothing had happened. The bridal photos vanished from her Instagram. The countdown posts and ring selfies stopped. Catherine stayed quiet too, except for one email she sent me weeks later with the subject line, "When you're ready to talk like adults." I never opened it. I didn't need to. Because the truth is, I didn't walk out of that wedding for revenge or vindication. I walked out because I was done. Done shrinking. Done apologizing for surviving. Done being the family's living cautionary tale. My life didn't transform overnight. I still work the same shifts, still juggle rent and groceries and laundry. But I stand straighter. I speak louder when it matters. And I no longer hide in the back of rooms I've earned the right to be in. I see the change in Jude, too. He doesn't just look at me like I'm his mom. He looks at me like I'm the kind of person he wants to become. Someone who doesn't break, even when the world tells her she should. He still talks about Nate sometimes. Calls him the man with the microphone. Sometimes he'll ask why Nate did what he did. I always give the same answer. Because love isn't about saying the right things when it's easy. It's about doing the hard thing when it counts. That night, I didn't get a bouquet. I didn't toss one either. I didn't dance under fairy lights or cry happy tears into a champagne glass. But I left with something better. I left with my son's hand in mine, my dignity intact, and the quiet certainty that I no longer owe anyone an explanation for the life I've built. And that was the ending no one saw coming, especially the ones who thought they'd written me out of the story.